So here's our concept check for section 2.1, and this goes back to the very first video section that we did. But describe the three particles associated with atoms. Those would be the protons, neutrons, and electrons. Protons and neutrons in the nucleus, electrons in the electron cloud. Protons and neutrons have one atomic mass unit, and then the electrons are negligible. So what's the difference between a molecule and a compound? Well, a molecule is any two atoms or two or more atoms that are bound together, and a compound is a molecule of more than one element. So it contains atoms from more than one element, so two or more elements. So N2 would be a molecule but not a compound, but a C6H12O6 would be a compound. It's also a molecule. So what is the pH of a solution with this 0.0001 molars hydrogen? And again, so this would be, just real quickly, this would be 1 times 10 to the negative fourth. So the pH equals the negative log of the 1 times 10 to the negative fourth. And so the log is that number, so negative of negative 4. And so negative times a negative is a positive, so this would be 4. And that would be acidic. pH of 3 would be also acidic. So that is our review of section 1, real quick review. And now we're going to talk about carbon and the chemistry of carbon. So carbon is the fundamental element of life because it has 4 electrons in the outer shell, so it can form 4 bonds, and it can bond with other atoms, including carbon. And so we can see that they make these linear, sometimes they're nice long chains, and sometimes they're branched. And a lot of times they'll form rings with themselves because of the angle of the bonds. So they can form single bonds, they can form double bonds, they can even form triple bonds like this between carbon and nitrogen. So there are these functional groups, and in chemistry, you know, if you have at least hydrogen and carbon, that's an organic molecule. And if you just have a hydrocarbon and you add, say, a hydroxyl to it, then that makes it an alcohol. And so these functional groups are molecular groups or accessory molecules that bind to organic compounds. And they give the molecule a particular shape. And if you recall, our really key fundamental theme of biology is that shape dictates function. So these little groups of molecules change the shape, and therefore they change the function, and that is why they are called functional groups. So they help define the chemical class of organic molecules, because if you see these particular functional groups, then you know they're this type of molecule. And again, they give the molecule its shape, which dictates its function, and the reactions of organic compounds can be predicted by knowing its functional group. So that leads us into the second section, and I'm not sure why that's there before we get into section 2, which is talking about the macromolecules, the superstructures of life. And in this, we're going to be looking at the 4 main families of biochemicals. We'll look at carbohydrates and proteins and nucleic acids and lipids, and just how they're structured, what kind of molecules they contain, and what are some examples, and then how do we build these and break these molecules down. So the biochemistry is that field that studies the compounds of life. So chemistry is the study of matter, bio, life, so it's living molecules that are found in life. And there are 4 main families: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So here's a little table, and this is partly what I want you to know for the test, but I'm going to put a little bit more information onto the chart that you're going to fill out and that's in the study guide. So this tells a little bit about the carbohydrates, monosaccharides. They generally have like 3 to 7 carbons. A disaccharide is 2 monosaccharides, and polysaccharides are chains. So a monosaccharide is the monomer, and a dimer has 2 of the monomers, and a polymer has 3 or more. And here are some examples of monosaccharides like glucose and fructose, disaccharides like maltose and lactose and sucrose, and then some polysaccharides like starch, cellulose, and glycogen. So some of this we're going to talk about, but I'm going to break it down into what is a monomer and a dimer and polymer. And then there's some lipids, and you can see most of the time they have fatty acids of some sort, and then they have like glycerol in some cases and phosphate like phospholipids. A wax is made of fatty acids and alcohols, and steroids or ringed structure. And where we see these, like the phospholipid makes up the membrane of cells. Mycolic acid is found in acid-fast bacteria. This mycolic acid is what makes it kind of difficult to decolorize. So they're acid-fast. They will stay, the dyes will stay on the cells even if we use a decolorized like acid alcohol. And cholesterol is a steroid. Well, steroid is made from cholesterol, but cholesterol is the basic structure that then we make all of the different steroid hormones out of. And proteins, their basic structure is the amino acid, and they make up things like enzymes and all the basic structures of the cell. They are going to combine together with nucleic acids to make ribosomes, and they make antibodies. So there's all these different kinds of things that proteins do. Nucleic acids, or their basic structure is a nucleotide, and we have things like DNA and RNA and ATP that are some examples. So macromolecules are assembled from smaller molecular subunits called the monomers. Those are building blocks. And so we would say that the macromolecules are polymers, and the molecular subunits are monomers. So mono means one, and the mer is talking about like a subunit. And so these macromolecules are very large, and again, that's where you get the macro part. And polymerization is just making a polymer. So you have monomers, the repeating subunits, and they're in varying lengths that make the polymers. So the macromolecules, various functions that they have, they're structural components of cells, they're molecular messengers in the body, in multicellular organisms. They're energy sources, they're enzymes, they're nutrient sources, they're the sources of genetic information, so they have a lot of different functions. So we're going to talk specifically now about the 4 different groups, and we're going to start with the carbohydrates in the next video.